My hands were trembling so badly that morning, I nearly dropped my coffee mug, the same chipped one I had been using for 30 years, when the lawyer's letter arrived telling me Richard was dead and I would never see the $200,000 he owed me. I remember standing there in my small kitchen, the autumn sunlight streaming through the window above the sink, illuminating all the dust particles floating in the air like tiny witnesses to my shock. The letter felt heavy in my hands, heavier than paper should ever feel. My ex-husband, the man I had spent 23 years of my life with, the father of my daughter, was gone. And with him, apparently, went any hope of recovering the money that was rightfully mine. Money he had promised to repay after our divorce 7 years ago, money that represented half of everything we had built together, money I desperately needed as I approached retirement at 64 years old. The kitchen clock, that old round one with the loud tick that Richard always complained about but I refused to replace, marked each second with its familiar rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound felt like it was counting down the moments of my financial security slipping away. I had worked as a dental hygienist for 42 years, my back aching from leaning over patients all day, my hands cramping from holding instruments, saving every penny I could, and now this. Richard had been my high school sweetheart. We married young, built a life together in this very house where I still lived. When our daughter Emma was born, I thought we were complete. I thought we would grow old together. Sitting on that porch I could see through the window, watching grandchildren play in the yard. But life, as I have learned in my 6 decades on this earth, rarely follows the script we write for it. The betrayal had come slowly, like water eroding stone. Little lies here and there. Late nights at the office that smelled of perfume instead of paperwork. The way he stopped looking at me during dinner, his eyes always on his phone, his mind always somewhere else. When I finally confronted him, when I finally found the credit card statements for hotels I had never stayed in, dinners I had never eaten, he did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He just looked relieved, like I had finally given him permission to leave. The divorce was brutal. Not because of anger, I was too tired for anger by then, but because of the numbers. We had built a modest but solid life. The house was paid off. We had savings. We had invested carefully. But Richard wanted out, and he wanted out fast. His new girlfriend, 20 years younger, with perfect teeth and no wrinkles around her eyes, was pregnant. He needed money to start his new life, his second chance at youth and happiness. Our lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia, who had seen 1,000 stories like mine, fought hard. But Richard was clever. He had already moved assets, hidden accounts, made himself look poorer on paper than he actually was. In the end, we reached a settlement. I kept the house, this house with its creaking floors and memories in every corner, and he agreed to pay me $200,000 over 5 years. It was not everything I deserved, Patricia told me with sad eyes, but it was something. For the first 2 years, the checks came. Not always on time, but they came. Richard had married his girlfriend. Melissa was her name, though I tried not to think it, tried not to picture her in wedding white like I had once worn. And they had their baby, a boy. Emma told me about him sometimes, reluctantly, knowing it hurt me, but also knowing I needed to know. She was caught between 2 worlds, my daughter, trying to love her father while understanding what he had done to her mother. Then the checks stopped coming. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Banks make errors. People forget. I called Richard's number, the same one he had always had, the one I had dialed 1,000,000 times over 2 decades, but it went straight to voicemail. I left messages, polite at first, then firmer, then desperate. No response. I tried reaching him through Emma, but she said he was distant with her too now, wrapped up in his new family, his new life. The old one, including his first daughter and first wife, seemed to have faded into inconvenience for him. I hired another lawyer, a younger man this time named David, who wore expensive suits and smelled like ambition. He sent letters, official ones with legal letterhead and threatening language about contempt of court. Richard responded through his own lawyer, claiming business troubles, promising to resume payments soon, always soon, but soon never came. 3 years passed, 3 years of me lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, doing calculations in my head. My retirement account was smaller than it should be. Social Security would not be enough. We had planned together once upon a time, to have that $200,000 as a cushion, as security, as the freedom to not worry about every dollar in my old age. Without it, I was facing a future of continuing to work until my body gave out, of cutting corners, of choosing between medication and groceries. I began to resent everything. The way the house needed repairs I could not afford. The way my car made a noise that probably meant an expensive fix. The way my back hurt more each year and I knew soon I would have to stop working, but could not afford to stop. The way I saw Melissa on Emma's social media sometimes. Emma tried to hide it, but I saw anyway, looking happy and young and unaware that her happiness was built on the foundation of my stolen security. Then, that Tuesday morning in October, the letter came. Richard was dead. Heart attack at 59. Sudden, unexpected, gone. The lawyer's letter was brief, professional, cold. It informed me that Mr. Richard Thomas Morrison had passed away, that his estate was being settled, and that as a creditor with a documented judgment, I could file a claim against the estate. There would be a hearing. I should bring documentation. The letter ended with condolences that felt as genuine as a form letter could feel, which is to say, not at all. I did not cry. I thought I might, but I did not. Instead, I felt something cold settle in my chest, something hard and determined. Richard had escaped me in death, escaped the obligation to face me, to make things right, to acknowledge what he had taken. But his estate could not escape. The law was on my side now, finally, clearly, undeniably. I called David immediately. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was steady. I told him about the letter. He was quiet for a moment, then said the words I needed to hear. We had documentation, we had a judgment, the debt was valid and enforceable against the estate. We would get my money. It might take time, estates can be complicated, but barring unexpected complications, I would finally get what I was owed. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something like hope. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering every document, every canceled check, every letter, every email, every piece of evidence of the debt. I organized it all in a blue folder that I kept on my kitchen table where I could see it every morning when I drank my coffee. That folder became a kind of talisman, a promise that justice existed somewhere in this world. Emma called me during this time. Her voice was tight with grief, but also with something else. Worry, maybe, or fear. She asked how I was handling the news of her father's death. I told her the truth. I was not handling it as a widow handles the death of a beloved husband, but as a creditor handles the death of a debtor, with practical concern rather than emotional devastation. She was quiet after that. Then she said something that should have warned me, but I was too focused on my blue folder and my documentation to hear it properly. She said, "Melissa wants to talk to you about Dad's estate, but Mom, maybe you should just let it go. Maybe it is not worth the fight." I dismissed her concern. Emma was young, only 31, and she had not yet learned what I had learned about money and security and the importance of fighting for what is yours. She could afford to be generous, to let things go. She had her whole life ahead of her, her career, her health, her options. I had my 60s and 70s and 80s stretching before me like a tightrope with no safety net, and that $200,000 was the difference between walking that rope with confidence or crawling it in fear. The estate hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. David met me at the courthouse, an imposing old building with marble floors that echoed with every footstep. He carried a briefcase that I knew contained copies of everything in my blue folder. He wore his confident lawyer face, the one that said, "We had this," that victory was assured. But when we entered the small hearing room, when I saw Melissa sitting there with her own lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper suit, I felt the first flutter of real worry. Melissa looked different than she did in the photos on Emma's social media. Older, tireder, less glossy. She had a baby on her hip, Richard's son, my daughter's half-brother, a toddler with Richard's dark eyes and curly hair. Seeing him hurt in a way I had not expected. He was so small, so innocent, so unaware that his father had destroyed one family to create him. The judge was a woman close to my age, with gray hair and reading glasses that she peered over when she looked at us. She had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense mouth. She reviewed the documents quickly, efficiently, asking David to confirm the dates and amounts of the judgment. Everything was in order. The debt was clear. Richard had owed me $182,000 at the time of his death, $200,000 minus the $18,000 he had actually paid in those first 2 years. Melissa's lawyer stood then, and the room got very quiet. She spoke carefully, deliberately, dropping words into the silence like stones into still water. She did not dispute the debt, she said. The documentation was clear. However, she wanted to present evidence that would significantly impact the estate's ability to pay. David objected immediately. A debt is a debt, he said. The creditor's claim supersedes almost everything else, but the judge held up her hand. She would hear the evidence, she said. Then she would decide. Melissa's lawyer pulled out a folder of her own. Not blue like mine, but manila and official looking. She approached the judge's bench and handed over several documents. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly as she read. Then she looked at me, and something in her expression, pity maybe, or concern, made my stomach clench. The estate is insolvent, Melissa's lawyer said. Mr. Morrison died with significant debts. Credit cards, business loans, a mortgage on the home that is underwater due to market conditions. After all secured creditors are paid, after funeral expenses and necessary estate administration costs, there will be virtually nothing left. Mrs. Morrison's claim, while valid, will likely receive pennies on the dollar, if anything at all. I felt the room tilt. David was arguing, pointing out that my claim had been established years ago, that it should have priority, that this could not be legal. But the judge was shaking her head. If the estate is insolvent, she said quietly, then all unsecured creditors take their proportional share of whatever is left, which could indeed be very little. But that was not even the worst part. That came next, when Melissa stood up, shifting her baby to her other hip, and looked directly at me for the first time. Her eyes were not hostile. They were sad and scared, and determined in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. Your Honor, she said, her voice shaking slightly, I know Mrs. Morrison is owed money. I know the judgment is valid, but I need the court to understand something else. My son, she paused, swallowing hard. My son is not Richard's biological child. The room went completely silent. Even the baby seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and stopped squirming. I stared at Melissa, not understanding, not wanting to understand, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath my feet. She continued, her words tumbling out faster now. I discovered it a few months ago, she said. Richard had started acting strange, distant. I thought maybe he was having an affair, so I did something I am not proud of. I went through his things. I found documents, DNA test results that he had ordered without telling me. The test showed that he was not our son's biological father. The judge leaned forward. Did Mr. Morrison know this before he died? She asked. Yes, Melissa whispered. He knew. We had a terrible fight about it. I admitted that I had been unfaithful one time, just one time, early in our marriage when things were difficult between us. I thought the baby was Richard's. I truly believed it. But the test proved otherwise. Richard was devastated. He said our whole marriage was a lie. He said he did not know if he could stay. Then, 3 days later, he had the heart attack. I felt numb. This was too much information, too much drama, too much of someone else's tragedy bleeding into mine. What did this have to do with my money, with what Richard owed me, with the blue folder of documentation sitting on the table in front of David? But Melissa was not done. She turned to look at the judge fully now, ignoring me, focusing on the only person in the room with the power to change her future. Your Honor, she said, I am applying for Social Security survivor benefits for my son. I know he is not biologically Richard's child, but Richard was married to me when he was born. Richard's name is on the birth certificate. Under the law, he is legally considered the father unless paternity is explicitly challenged in court, which it never was. My son deserves those survivor benefits. It is the only financial security he will have. And there it was, the shocking DNA test that the title of my story promised, but it was not the twist I had been expecting. It was not some secret child of Richard's that I never knew about, not some hidden family that would claim what was mine. It was the opposite. A child who was not Richard's at all, but who might still have legal claim to his legacy. David was on his feet immediately, arguing that this was completely irrelevant to my claim, that whatever drama existed in Richard's second marriage had nothing to do with a valid judgment from his first marriage. But Melissa's lawyer countered smoothly. It was relevant because if the son qualified for survivor benefits, those benefits could be considered part of the estate's available assets for creditors, or alternatively, they might need to be protected from creditors to ensure the child's welfare, depending on how the court ruled. The judge called for a recess. She needed time to review the law, she said. This was an unusual situation. We should return in 2 hours. I walked out of that courthouse, feeling like I had aged another decade in the span of 30 minutes. David tried to reassure me, saying we still had a strong claim, that Melissa's situation was sympathetic, but did not change the fundamental validity of our judgment. But I barely heard him. I was thinking about that little boy with Richard's eyes, who was not actually Richard's son, who was innocent in all of this, who needed security just like I did. I went to a diner across the street from the courthouse and ordered coffee I did not drink. I sat in a booth by the window, watching people walk by, living their normal lives, unencumbered by the complicated mathematics of debt and betrayal and biology. An elderly couple walked past, holding hands, moving slowly but together. I wondered what their story was, whether they had made it through life unscathed, or whether they too carried scars invisible to strangers. My phone buzzed. Emma. Texting, not calling, because she was at work but clearly worried. "Mom," she wrote, "how is the hearing going? Are you okay?" I did not know how to answer that. Was I okay? I had been owed money for years, had finally thought I would get justice, only to discover that the estate was broke and the whole situation was tangled up in someone else's paternity drama. But little did I know, sitting in that diner booth, sipping cold coffee, that the real shock was still coming. When we returned to the courthouse 2 hours later, the judge looked serious. She had made her decision, she said. She had reviewed the relevant statutes and case law. The situation was indeed unusual, but the law provided guidance. First, she said, regarding Mrs. Morrison's claim, the debt is valid, the judgment is enforceable. However, the estate is demonstrably insolvent. After all secured creditors, administrative expenses, and mandatory obligations are satisfied, there will be approximately $12,000 remaining for unsecured creditors. Mrs. Morrison's claim represents the largest unsecured debt, but there are 3 other smaller creditors also making claims. Following the statutory formula for distribution, Mrs. Morrison will receive approximately $7,200. $7,000 out of $182,000 owed. Out of $200,000 originally promised, out of 7 years of waiting and hoping and struggling, $7,000. I felt something crack inside me. Not break exactly, but crack, like ice on a pond in early spring, still holding together but weakened, dangerous, ready to give way. But the judge was not finished. Second, she said, regarding the survivor benefits for the minor child. Having reviewed the documentation, including the birth certificate and marriage certificate, and considering the statutory definition of paternity in this jurisdiction, the child qualifies as Mr. Morrison's legal dependent for purposes of Social Security survivor benefits, regardless of biological paternity. Mr. Morrison never challenged paternity during his lifetime. His name is on the birth certificate, and he was married to the mother when the child was born. Therefore, the child is entitled to benefits. Melissa let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp of relief. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. I just sat there frozen, watching my $200,000 turn into $7,000 right before my eyes. The judge looked at me then, directly at me, and I saw something in her face that I had seen before in other contexts. The look of someone who understands that the law and justice are not always the same thing. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "I know this is not the outcome you hoped for, but the court is bound by law, not by what feels fair. I am sorry." The hearing ended. David gathered our papers. Melissa and her lawyer left quickly, Melissa clutching her baby like he was a lifeline, which I suppose he was. I sat there for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, just breathing in and out, trying to absorb what had just happened. Outside, David tried again to console me. 7,000 was better than nothing, he said. We had done everything right, presented a solid case. The insolvency was simply bad luck. Sometimes life is not fair. He said these things like they were revelations, like I had not been learning that exact lesson for 64 years. I drove home in a daze. The autumn afternoon was beautiful, the trees brilliant with color, the sky that particular shade of October blue that makes everything look crisp and clear. It felt obscene somehow, all that beauty existing in a world where Richard could owe me a life-changing sum of money and die before paying it, where the law could validate my claim and still give me pennies, where a woman 20 years younger could start a family with my husband and end up broke too. Both of us casualties of Richard's choices. When I got home, I did not go inside right away. I sat in my car in the driveway, looking at my house. This house that was paid off, that was mine. That represented the only security I had managed to salvage from my marriage. I thought about Melissa's house, underwater on its mortgage, about to be lost. I thought about that little boy who looked like Richard but was not Richard's son, who would get survivor benefits because of a legal technicality. I thought about Emma, caught in the middle of all this, loving her dead father despite everything, trying to love her mother without taking sides. And I thought about Richard, dead at 59. Never old enough to regret what he had done, never old enough to make amends, never old enough to face the consequences of his choices. Had he known the estate was insolvent? Had he been lying awake at night too, worrying about money, feeling the walls close in? Or had he simply not cared, figured it would all work itself out somehow, that he would deal with it tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until there were no more tomorrows? I finally went inside. The house was exactly as I had left it that morning. The blue folder still on the kitchen table, the coffee mug still in the sink, the clock still ticking its steady rhythm. But everything felt different now. The folder was no longer a talisman of justice waiting to be served. It was just papers, evidence of something that did not matter anymore, at least not in the way I had thought it would matter. I made myself dinner that night, a simple meal, pasta with olive oil and garlic, the kind of thing I had been eating more and more as I tried to stretch my grocery budget. I sat at the table and ate slowly, thinking about the last 7 years, about all the time and energy I had spent being angry at Richard, being resentful, calculating and recalculating what I was owed, what I deserved, what had been taken from me. The pasta was good. I had grown basil in my garden that summer, and I tore some leaves over the pasta, the way my mother had taught me decades ago. The taste brought back memories. My mother's kitchen, Sunday dinners, the simplicity of food and family before everything got so complicated. And it was there, sitting alone at my kitchen table, eating pasta with fresh basil, that something shifted, not dramatically, not like a revelation in a movie where music swells and everything becomes clear, just a small, quiet shift, like a door opening slightly in a room I thought was sealed shut. I realized that I had been waiting for Richard to do the right thing, waiting for the courts to deliver justice, waiting for the universe to recognize that I had been wronged and to correct that wrong with a check for $200,000. I had put my entire sense of security, my entire emotional energy into that waiting. And now the waiting was over, and the result was $7,000 and the knowledge that sometimes the bad guy dies before getting his comeuppance, and sometimes the law says you are right, but cannot make you whole. But little did I know that the real transformation was not about the money at all. It was about what I would do with this new reality, this ending that was not the ending I had written in my mind all those years. That weekend, Emma came to visit. She brought flowers, which she never did, and wine, which she did more often. We sat on the porch, the same porch I had imagined Richard and I would grow old on, and she told me she had talked to Melissa. "Mom," Emma said carefully, "I know you are angry about the estate. I know you deserve that money. But I need to tell you something about Melissa. She is broke, completely broke. The house is being foreclosed. She has been surviving on credit cards, and those are maxed out now. She has no family to help her. She is talking about moving to a shelter with the baby until she can get the survivor benefits processed and find somewhere affordable to live." I listened, saying nothing, watching the leaves fall from the oak tree in my front yard. That tree had been there when Richard and I bought this house 40 years ago. It had survived storms and droughts and harsh winters. It was still standing. Emma continued, "I am not saying you should give up your claim to the estate money. That is your right. But I wanted you to know the full picture. Melissa is not the enemy. She is just another person Dad hurt. My daughter was wiser than I had been at her age, or maybe just kinder. She had her father's eyes, but thankfully not his character. She could see nuance where I had been seeing only black and white, creditor and debtor, wronged and wrongdoer. I thought about this for several days. The $7,000 would come eventually, David had said. Estate settlement takes time, but the court had ordered the distribution, so it would happen. $7,000 would help. It would not change my life, would not secure my retirement, would not undo 7 years of stress, but it would help. Or I could do something different. The idea came to me slowly at first, then faster, gathering momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. It was an idea that made no financial sense, that David would probably argue against, that younger me would have dismissed as foolish, but I was not younger me anymore. I was 64 years old, still working, still healthy, still standing like that oak tree in my yard. And I had learned something in all those years of living. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to exercise your power. I called David on a Wednesday morning. I could hear the surprise in his voice when I told him what I wanted to do. "Are you sure?" he asked. "You are entitled to this money. You fought for years. You can make other choices later, but if you waive your claim now, it is final." "I am sure," I told him. I surprised myself with how steady my voice was, how certain I felt. "Draw up whatever papers I need to sign. I want to waive my claim to the estate distribution and allow the funds to be divided among the other creditors instead." There was silence on the line. Then David said, "You know Melissa will benefit from this. If the other creditors are paid more fully, it means less debt burden on her, more possibility she can keep the house, or at least walk away without being destroyed financially." "I know," I said. After I hung up, I sat with my decision. It felt strange, like taking off a heavy coat I had been wearing so long I had forgotten I could remove it. The anger was still there. I was not a saint, and I had been genuinely wronged, but it felt different now, smaller, less consuming. I had been letting that anger run my life for 7 years. I had been letting what Richard owed me define who I was, and I was tired of it. The papers came 2 days later. I signed them at my kitchen table, the same table where the blue folder still sat. I put the signed papers in an envelope, sealed it, put a stamp on it. Then I did something I had not done in years. I took a long walk. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October, that perfect autumn weather where you need a sweater but not a coat. I walked through my neighborhood, past houses where families lived, where children played, where other people were living their complicated lives with their own hurts and hopes. I walked past the elementary school where Emma had gone, past the park where she had learned to ride a bike, past the corner store where Richard used to buy lottery tickets every Friday, always certain he would win big someday. I thought about those lottery tickets as I walked. Richard had been a dreamer, always certain that something better was coming, that he deserved more than what he had, that happiness was always just around the next corner with the next woman or the next baby or the next chance. He had spent our marriage waiting for his real life to begin, never understanding that his real life was already happening, that those Tuesday dinners and Saturday mornings and ordinary days were the life, not the preamble to the life. I had been doing the same thing in a different way, waiting for justice, waiting for what I was owed, waiting to feel secure, waiting to be able to relax, always waiting. But what if I stopped waiting? What if I recognized that this was my life, right now, walking through my neighborhood on a Saturday afternoon at 64 years old? I had a house. I had a daughter who loved me. I had my health, mostly. I had work that I could still do. I had a garden where I grew basil. I had that oak tree in my front yard. I had survived a marriage that ended badly and come out the other side still standing. Maybe that was enough. Maybe I was already secure in ways that had nothing to do with bank account balances. Maybe the universe did not owe me anything. Maybe I just owed myself the freedom to stop keeping score. When I got home from my walk, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but lighter. I mailed the envelope with the waiver papers. It was done. Emma called me 2 weeks later. Her voice was strange, careful. "Mom," she said, "Melissa called me. She is confused. She got a notice from the estate lawyer that you waived your claim. She does not understand why you would do that. She wanted me to ask you if it was a mistake." "It was not a mistake," I said. "But Mom," Emma said, "that was your money. You deserved it. Why would you give it up?" I thought about how to explain it. "Because it was not my money anymore," I finally said. It was just an idea of money, a number on paper that I was never going to see, and holding on to that idea was costing me more than $7,000. It was costing me peace, so I let it go. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. I am proud of you, Mom. I know that was hard, but I am proud of you. Those words meant more than the $200,000 ever could have. I realized that in letting go of what I was owed, I had gained something more valuable, my daughter's respect, and more importantly, my own. The weeks passed. The estate was finally settled. The mortgage on Richard's house was paid off by the life insurance policy he had maintained, which surprised everyone, including Melissa. It turned out that despite his other financial failures, Richard had kept that one responsible thing in place. Melissa was able to stay in the house with the baby. The other small creditors were paid in full, and I kept working, kept living, kept tending my garden and paying my bills and planning a modest but sufficient retirement. But something had changed in me. I found that I was not lying awake at night anymore, running calculations, feeling that tight knot of anxiety in my chest. I was sleeping better. My back hurt less, or maybe I just noticed it less. I was laughing more, finding small joys in ordinary things. The perfect cup of coffee, a funny patient at work, the way the afternoon light came through my kitchen window. I even started dating, which surprised me as much as anyone. A man from my dental office building, a dentist named Michael who was a widower, who understood loss and rebuilding, who liked to walk and talk and did not expect me to be anything other than who I was. We were taking things slowly, carefully. Two people in our 60s who knew that life was fragile and precious and sometimes cruel, but also sometimes unexpectedly kind. 6 months after the estate was settled, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Melissa. My hands shook a little when I opened it, not sure what to expect, what she could possibly have to say to me. The letter was short and handwritten. "Dear Mrs. Morrison," it said, "I do not know how to thank you for what you did. I know you had every right to take the estate money. I know Richard owed you, but your decision to waive your claim made it possible for me to keep my home, to have a stable place to raise my son. I cannot pay you back financially, but I want you to know that your generosity has changed my life. I also want you to know that I have started therapy, and I am working on understanding my own choices and patterns. I made mistakes in my marriage, and I am trying to learn from them. I know you do not owe me forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see you. I see what you sacrificed, and I will never forget it." The letter was signed simply Melissa. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer in my kitchen, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. It was evidence of something I had been learning slowly over the past months, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose mercy over justice, grace over revenge, freedom over resentment. That does not mean what Richard did was okay. It does not mean I was not hurt, not wronged, not deserving of what I was promised. But it means I chose not to let that wrong define the rest of my life. I chose not to let Richard's debts, financial or moral, continue to cost me my peace. I also realized something else. By waiving my claim, by letting go of that money, I had broken a pattern. Richard had taken from me, and I had every right to take what I could get back, even if it hurt someone else in the process. But that would have just continued the cycle of hurt, of people using each other, of financial survival trumping human compassion. Instead, I had chosen something different. I had chosen to be the place where the hurt stopped, where the pattern broke, where someone said enough. And in doing that, I had discovered a kind of power I had not known I possessed. Not the power of money or legal claims or righteous anger, but the power of choice, of agency, of deciding who I wanted to be regardless of what others had done to me. Life continued. I kept working for 2 more years, then retired when I turned 66. My retirement was modest, but I managed. I downsized some things, found creative ways to save money, accepted help from Emma when she offered it. I learned to live within my means, to find richness in things other than financial abundance. Michael and I got married in a small ceremony at my house, under that oak tree that had seen so much of my life. Emma was there, and some friends, and even a few people from work. It was simple and joyful, and exactly what I needed. Michael moved into my house, the house I had shared with Richard, but it felt different now. We were making new memories, painting over the old ones, not erasing them, but adding layers of new life. Emma told me later that Melissa had wanted to attend the wedding, wanted to bring a gift, but had not been sure if it would be appropriate. I told Emma to tell her that she would have been welcome, and I meant it. I had no illusions about Melissa. We would never be friends. Our histories were too tangled for that. But I had no hate for her either. She was just another person trying to survive in a world that did not always make sense, trying to raise a child, trying to figure out how to live with her own choices. I understood that better than I once had. Now, as I sit here at 70 years old, looking back on that difficult chapter of my life, I can see it differently than I did when I was in the middle of it. I can see that the $200,000 Richard owed me was never really about the money. It was about validation, about someone acknowledging that I mattered, that my years of marriage and sacrifice and compromise had value. I wanted Richard to pay me because I wanted proof that what we had built together had been real, that I had not wasted 23 years of my life on a man who could just walk away without consequence. But I was looking for that validation in the wrong place. Richard could not give it to me, not in life and not in death. The only person who could validate my worth, my choices, my life, was me. And I did not need $200,000 to do that. I just needed to recognize that I had survived, that I was still here, that I had built a life that meant something, even if it did not look like the life I had planned. In the end, I learned that respect is not demanded, and it is not bought. It is not something someone else can take away from you or give back to you. Respect comes from within, from knowing your own value regardless of how others treat you. I spent 7 years fighting for money that represented respect, validation, justice. But the real respect came when I stopped fighting, when I chose my own peace over proving I was right. I also learned that empowerment does not always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like letting go. Sometimes it looks like making a choice that costs you something but frees you from something even more expensive. The weight of carrying old hurts, old angers, old ideas about what you are owed. The money I waived is gone. I will never get it back. But what I gained in exchange is worth more than any dollar amount. I gained freedom from the past, from bitterness, from the exhausting work of keeping score. I gained respect for myself, for my ability to make hard choices guided by wisdom rather than anger. I gained a relationship with my daughter that is deeper because she has seen me struggle and choose the harder right over the easier wrong. I gained a new marriage built on honesty and acceptance rather than fairy tale expectations. Most importantly, I gained the understanding that I am not defined by what was done to me, by what I lost, by what I was owed and never received. I am defined by who I choose to be in response to those things. And I choose to be someone who lives with an open heart, who sees other people's struggles even when they conflict with my own, who knows that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose mercy. Richard died owing me money, but he no longer owns my peace. That is the only debt that truly matters, and I have finally paid it off, not to him, but to myself. I still have the blue folder tucked away in a closet now. Sometimes I take it out and look at all those documents, all that evidence of what I was owed. It reminds me of who I was then, how much I have grown, how far I have come. It reminds me that pain is real, that injustice happens, that sometimes life is genuinely unfair. But it also reminds me that I have the power to decide what story I tell about my pain, about my past, about the person I want to become. So when people ask me about Richard, about the divorce, about the money, I tell them the truth. I tell them that he hurt me, that he owed me, that the legal system validated my claim but could not make me whole. But I also tell them that I chose to let it go, not because he deserved my grace, but because I deserved my peace. And that choice, that moment of deciding who I wanted to be, made all the difference. Have you ever felt trapped by what someone owes you, whether it is money or apology or acknowledgement? Have you ever discovered that holding on to your right to be angry costs more than whatever you are fighting for? Have you ever found that the greatest power you possess is not the power to make others pay, but the power to free yourself from the need for payment? Those are the questions I ask myself now when I face difficult choices, when I feel that old familiar anger rising, when I am tempted to keep score and demand what is owed. And more often than not, I find that the answer lies not in fighting harder, but in choosing wisdom, in choosing freedom, in choosing to be the person I want to be regardless of what others have done. That is the story of my ex-husband, who died owing me $200,000, and the shocking DNA test that changed everything, and the choice I made that changed me even more. It is not the ending I expected, But it is the ending I needed, the one that taught me what really matters, the one that freed me to live the rest of my life with peace instead of bitterness, with hope instead of resentment, with wisdom earned through struggle and pain, and ultimately, grace. This is fictional drama created for entertainment, not a real personal account. While it explores authentic themes of family exclusion, boundary setting, and elder empowerment, the characters, situations, and events are entirely invented for narrative purposes. This story is designed to resonate emotionally with audiences who have experienced family conflict while maintaining complete transparency about its fictional nature.